Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis joins me now to talk about Florida. The governor there, Rick Scott, is going to be coming out right now. How do you believe things are going as far as preparation for this massive storm?
Well, I think they've been going well. The president has been very forward-leaning. We very much appreciate him offering federal resources. And Governor Scott, as always, has been very forward-leaning to make sure we're prepared. And we have some of the best local emergency management officials in the country for obvious reasons. And so I think it's important that people in Florida listen to their local officials, listen to Governor Scott, and just have a plan and take the precautions. This is a massive, massive storm. There's actually been some encouraging movements that it may be tracking a little bit more east. I pray that it misses the coast of Florida, but it's too early to tell that, and I think we have to prepare for a significant storm.
Harvey relief aid, which is supposed to be approved by the House today, has now reached $8.5 billion. It certainly sets a precedent, though, as the largest federal aid package in American history due to a natural disaster like this. As Florida prepares for one of the largest hurricanes to churn in the Atlantic, how has Harvey relief impacted the state of Florida?
Well, I think the images of Harvey have impacted how Floridians are viewing it. If you remember, we had a pretty close call with Matthew. It did do damage along the Florida coast. It was not a direct hit, but Florida had not had a hurricane hit in years and years, and so we had millions of new Floridians who had never experienced a hurricane, and so there was a concern that people may not heed the warnings. I think by and large they did, but now looking at the situation and the devastation of Harvey, I think people are being super cautious, which is a good thing. You see the waters flying off the shelves in these grocery stores. People are already starting to get out of Dodge to protect themselves and their family. So in that sense, I think Florida, the average person knows what could happen. There
were lessons, very hard lessons learned in Houston. You remember that some political officials there didn't necessarily call for mandatory evacuations. You're aware of that, right? That there were,
that's correct.
There were not mandatory evacuations put into place. There weren't even evacuations, in fact, put into place at all. In fact, people were encouraged to stay home because they didn't want people on the streets. And then those people, many of them, either ended up flooded in their cars, many drowning in their vehicles, some being rescued from the rooftops. Now, let's talk in Florida. Right now, there are voluntary evacuations underway. Let's talk about those. These are so critical because now is the time for people to get out, not after the storm has hit.
That's correct, and Governor Scott has done a great thing by suspending all tolls. So if you're leaving South Florida, you're not going to have to worry about paying tolls. Make sure you have a plan. Make sure you have what you need. People are going to be able to transport their pets interstate without there being an issue with our neighboring states. So I think the guidance has gone out well. And then there are some areas that will be under a mandatory evacuation. The Florida Keys, Monroe County. I think you'll see something similar for Dade and some of our other southern Florida counties. But then as the storm progresses, and as it shifts, if it does shift to the east, you start to then implicate all our counties up and down Florida's east coast. And so I think it's important to listen to the local officials.
Right.
Evacuating people is not something you do willy-nilly. You do it because you think the risk of people staying there to life and property is simply too high, that at worst you have an inconvenience of people leaving when they didn't end up having a hit. But it's better to err on the side of caution. So they're making those decisions with the best information that they have.
I lived in Florida. I grew up there in the 80s, so I know evacuations all too well. I lived on Singer Island. We got evacuated, it seemed like, every single month during hurricane season. I do remember, though, that when people evacuate, it is tremendous. I mean, the traffic on the streets, everybody basically heads north, right, to Orlando. Now, apparently, some people are buying plane tickets trying to get out, and I'm reading this morning that some airlines are, in fact, inflating their ticket prices. Is there anything at all that can be done to prevent this? I saw one person, in fact, was trying to book a plane ticket to Atlanta, Georgia, and their plane ticket was originally some $500, and it jumped up to $3,300. I mean, for people to evacuate safely, it needs to be affordable.
No, absolutely. And the plane, if you can do that at obviously a reasonable price, is probably a good thing. The reason is because the storm track is uncertain. People don't necessarily even know where to evacuate. Some of the tracks that had it hitting the entire state, you don't necessarily have a coast you can evacuate to. If it's on one coast, you can go to the other coast. And so I think the plane flights could be very good for a lot of people. But yeah, it's really concerning that someone would jack up the rates like that to try to take advantage of this situation. We do police that with the gas and some of the necessities on the ground in Florida at the state level.
The
airlines will probably be more of a federal issue, but that's definitely something that we got to look at. at, and it's not
Definitely.
encouraging to hear that.
All right. Congressman Ron DeSantis, thank you very much.